So here's the thing, the general rule of thumb when it comes to creating videos is you want people to be engaged in your story and the content that you're creating and not be focused on the intricacies of the actual video process. However, one of the most prominent areas where people tend to mess up is how they cut their video. Because if you're not using the right tools and techniques to cut your video efficiently, then people will notice the cuts and therefore they'll notice that they're watching a video and therefore that will pull them out of the story and your content. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 types of cut that are going to help your videos appear to be more seamless and help your viewers to notice the cuts less and notice your video more. J-cut, L-cut, and match cuts. Let's get into it. So the first cut that we are talking about in this video is a J-cut. And a J-cut is basically just a fancy name for a sound bridge. Now again, that does sound complicated, so let me break that down even further. Generally, when you're cutting videos, the video and the audio cut at the same time. So when the video cuts, the audio also cuts. So if you're cutting 2 video clips together where people are talking, as soon as one video clip goes into the next, you also hear the new audio at the same time you see the new video. But the problem is this can become quite jarring because you're having to process new video and new audio at the same time. This can just be a little bit overwhelming for the eye and it can pull you out of the video if that cut lands at an awkward time. So a J-cut actually splits that and you hear the audio before you see the new video. So you'll be watching a video and you'll hear the next audio cut in and then you'll see the video a moment later. Focused on the intricacies of the actual video process. However, one of the most prominent areas where people Now the reason why this works and the reason why this is less visible than cutting the video and the audio at the same time is because you're only having to process one thing at a time. So you hear the audio and then you see the video. So you process the audio, then you process the video, and it becomes less noticeable. Now J-cuts are really handy if you're cutting together an interview, for example. So let's say we're just looking at a montage of what's being talked about. So we're going to see some GVs of some buildings or whatever is happening on screen. And then we hear the interview appear in our headphones. We actually can hear the interview and we can't see the interview on screen yet. And then after a moment or two, the interview footage appears on screen. So we've got a brief moment of voiceover before we go into the actual video footage. So again, this is really useful because it's helping to seamlessly get us into that interview rather than just suddenly going from GVs into interview footage. It becomes less jarring. Now the opposite of a J-cut is an L-cut, and it's doing exactly the same as a J-cut is doing, but it's flipping it around the other way. So with the L-cut, you're splitting the audio and video again, so you're staggering them on at different times. But with the L-cut, you see the video first, and then that second audio comes in a moment later. And this achieves the exact same effect as a J-cut. It's just helping to make that cut more seamless and less noticeable. Again, this is really great in interviews or when you're piecing together some form of dialogue-based content. Now moving on, let's talk about match cuts. And match cuts are far more complex than J-cuts and L-cuts. J-cuts and L-cuts are very simple in comparison to match cuts. Now a match cut can be split into 3 different categories. You've got a graphic match cut, you've got a match on action, and then you've got the sound bridge. So that's graphic match cut, match on action, and a sound bridge. Now essentially a match cut is finding 2 elements within a scene that are very similar and cutting them together. The whole point of this, again, similar to the J-cuts and the L-cuts, is to make that cut less visible. It's more of a seamless transition. Because you're going from something into something similar, there's less processing involved in your mind. You just very quickly move on into this new scene. So the first example is your graphic match cut. And this is where you're visually cutting between 2 elements that look the same. So these can be shapes, colors, or framing and composition. Let's focus on shapes first. In the first shot, we can see a shot of the London Eye. In the second shot, we can see a cereal bowl. If you're cutting from the London Eye to the cereal bowl, even though these are 2 very different objects, because they are both round, if they're framed up in the scene exactly the same, then when you cut from this one item to this other item, even though they're very different and in very different environments, because there's a visual match, because there's a graphic match there, that's more of a seamless cut. We can apply that same logic to colors as well. So if we cut from an item which is blue and then we cut to another item which is blue, this becomes an easier cut on the eye. These can be drastically different items, by the way. They don't have to be a t-shirt and another t-shirt. This could maybe be a blue t-shirt going into the sky maybe. Because these are both blue, there's a graphic match there, and that's going to make for a more of a seamless cut. And then of course we've got the framing and composition, so you can match your framing and your composition to create a graphic match cut. So maybe you've got completely different objects in the frame, but you frame them up exactly the same, and then when you cut between these two items, it's a really seamless transition because there's not much of a change in the frame. The framing and the composition stays the same, therefore this is less information to process when you're cutting from shot A to shot B. Now the next type of match cut is a match on action, and that is exactly what it sounds like. So you do a similar action in your first shot and your second shot, so maybe you do a backflip for example. So you do a backflip in the first shot, you do a backflip in the second shot, and then when you cut these two together, because it's that same big action, you notice the cut a lot less than you would do as if you were cutting from a backflip to somebody standing still. So you're using that action to motivate that cut, and then when you're cutting at that point where there's the most action in the frame, because you're so focused on the movements, the cut becomes less noticeable, and therefore that becomes a really seamless cut from the first shot into the second shot. And then the third type of a match cut is a sound bridge. And a sound bridge can take advantage of sound effects, dialogue, music, any sort of audio file that is going to travel from the first shot into the second shot to make those two shots blend into one another. This one doesn't need to be complicated. You could literally just fade the audio from the first shot into the second shot, and then you could do the same the opposite way, so fade the audio from the second shot into the first shot. And because you're fading that audio across the cut, it's making that cut feel less noticeable. Because again, this is going back to what we know in J cuts and L cuts, because there's less noticeable difference in the audio, the visual cut becomes less noticeable as well. Because we're only having to register one thing at a time, it becomes less noticeable. And there you go, that was our roundup of the 3 most important cuts that every filmmaker and videographer should know if you want to create seamless edits. If you found this video useful and you would like to learn more about filmmaking fundamentals, then please do click on the playlist which is now on screen. This is Chris with InVideo, and I will see you on the next one. See you there.